Welcome to the presentation, Tips on Writing Good Learning Objectives.
But I just wanted to ask you which way I ought to go.
Well, that depends on where you want to get to.
Oh, it really doesn't matter. As long as I can...
Then it really doesn't matter which way you go.
If we want the students to know which way to go, then we must use quality objectives, as they are a key contributor to course design and subsequently student learning. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss the differences between outcomes and objectives and how this applies to your course student learning outcomes and module level objectives. Then we will review Bloom's revised taxonomy and apply the framework to the construction of module level objectives. The first part of this presentation will define key terms, outcomes, and objectives and illustrate the relationship within the course components. For the purpose of this presentation, we will define Student Learning Outcomes, SLOs, as the course level goals that are usually communicated to your students in the syllabus. They are general statements of desired instructional outcomes and can be broken down into more specific behaviors. The module level objectives, or MLOs, are specific weekly objectives that you will address throughout the course. It is important to communicate to your students what you want them to be able to do at the end of the lesson or week. You can choose to communicate the MLOs in a weekly announcement introducing the upcoming content to be covered, or what I do is post them directly on the course page. The benefits of explicitly defining the weekly MLOs are twofold. First, from the instructor point of view, it will help design activities, assignments, and assessments more effectively. From the student view, it can facilitate self-monitoring of student learning. This slide provides a graphic of the relationship between the SLOs and MLOs. As you can see, the MLOs should derive directly from the SLOs. This is a critical component of course alignment, which will be discussed in the next instructional video. Whether discussing both SLOs and MLOs, a quality outcome or objective must describe a student performance that can be meaningfully assessed. Now we will review Bloom's taxonomy, the framework we will use for course alignment. In 1956, Benjamin Bloom and his team of educators published a method of classification for thinking behaviors believed to be important in the processes of learning. The framework became the taxonomy of three domains. First, the cognitive domain. It's a knowledge-based domain that involves mental operations at all levels. The affective domain, an attitudinal-based domain involving feelings, attitudes, and values at various levels. And finally, the psychomotor domain, which is skills-based, involving the development of the body and the skills it performs physically at all levels. Naturally, for the purpose of writing course objectives and module objectives, we will focus on the cognitive domain. While it should be noted that other educational taxonomies and hierarchical systems have been developed, we will be using Bloom's taxonomy as it is the de facto standard for most educational-based curricula. As mentioned previously, the original Bloom's taxonomy was published in 1956. However, a revised version was designed by Anderson and Krathwohl. As you can see here from the diagram, the taxonomy illustrates cognitive processes in a hierarchical form, with lower-order thinking skills at the base of the triangle and higher-level thinking skills at the top. The diagram represents a continuum of increasing cognitive complexity. During the 1990s, a former student of Bloom's, Lauren Anderson, led an assembly which met for the purpose of updating the taxonomy, hoping to add relevance for the 21st century students and teachers. Published in 2001, the revision included several seemingly minor, yet actually significant changes. The changes in terminology between the two versions are perhaps the most obvious. The 6 major categories were changed from noun to verb forms, and additionally the lowest level of the original, knowledge, was renamed to remembering. Comprehension and synthesis were retitled to understanding and creating. The major differences lie in the more useful and comprehensive additions of how the original taxonomy intersects and acts upon different types of knowledge. This will be discussed later in this presentation. The cognitive process dimension of Bloom's revised taxonomy will be defined in the next 2 slides. As you can see, to remember something is to retrieve relevant knowledge from long-term memory. When a student is able to construct meaning from instructional messages, they are said to understand the concept. Application occurs when a learner is able to carry out or use a procedure in a given situation. Presented here are the higher order thinking skills, requiring basic foundation knowledge found in the lower order cognitive processes. Analyze means to break material into constituent parts and determine how these parts relate to each other and the overall structure of the idea. A learner evaluates when they are able to make judgments based on standards and criteria. And finally, when a learner puts elements together to form a coherent whole or reorganize knowledge into a new pattern, they are said to have created. It is very important to consider the levels of cognitive process dimension when composing your outcomes and objectives. The verbs used to denote the levels are ultimately what is used to determine the appropriate activities, assignments, and assessments in course design. As mentioned previously, Bloom's revised taxonomy included structural modifications, which included the addition of the knowledge dimension. The revised taxonomy classified 4 types of knowledge learners may be expected to acquire or construct, ranging from concrete to abstract. Factual knowledge includes terminology, specific details, and elements. Conceptual knowledge refers to classifications and categories and includes principles, generalizations, theories, and models. Procedural knowledge are subject-specific skills, techniques, and methods. This type of knowledge includes the ability to determine criteria for when to use the appropriate procedures. The highest level of knowledge is metacognitive. This involves strategic knowledge, cognitive tasks, and appropriate contextual and conditional knowledge. Metacognition also includes the awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes, something all educators should strive to help their students achieve. When the cognitive and knowledge dimensions are arranged in a matrix, it provides a framework for plotting objectives, activities, and assessments. Using a list of Bloom's taxonomy verbs that correspond with the different levels of cognition, you are able to plot the verbs that associate with your outcomes and objectives, and you can see what levels of cognition and knowledge your course addresses. When writing SLOs or creating MLOs, you will focus more on the cognitive processes. However, it is important to consider the levels of knowledge dimension as well. This will provide a clear roadmap to the course and provide a framework for students and instructors. You want to be sure your outcomes and objectives are specific, observable, and measurable by using the action verbs provided in the Bloom's taxonomy verb list. Your outcomes and objectives should be simple, unambiguous, and clearly focused statements. When performing course alignment, you will want to consider what the students should know at the end of the week, in addition to what you want the students to know at the end of the course. Naturally, you want to ensure that the MLOs are aligned with the SLOs, and an instructional video that demonstrates how to do this is forthcoming. You will want to be sure to only have 3 to 5 objectives each week. Any more than that, the students will experience cognitive overload and may learn a lot of content, but not very well. Quality over quantity wins the objective ballgame. Be sure to address a variety of cognitive levels throughout your course, but be conscientious of the course level in which you are designing. Lower level or undergraduate courses need to build the foundational knowledge to be able to succeed in the upper level or graduate courses. Here are some examples of incorrect and correctly written outcomes or objectives. Why is the first example incorrect? Learn about the concepts of duties, rights, and obligations. If outcomes and objectives are to be measurable, then how do you measure student learning? Better yet, how does this inform the student how they will be measured? A better way to do this is to include the word discussed. Now all parties involved know exactly what is expected of them in order to demonstrate knowledge of duties, rights, and obligations. And so what is the problem with the second example? Provide students with knowledge about how the library works. This is a teacher-centered performance and does not depict what the student is required to do in order to master the objectives. It is best practice to write your objectives from a student-centered point of view so that they know what is expected from them. Every program of instruction or course begins with a goal. This goal can be broken down into specific goals or learning outcomes and objectives. They are concise statements about what the students will be able to do at the conclusion of instruction. Clearly articulating learning outcomes and objectives are important because they provide students with a clear purpose to focus their learning efforts. They direct your choice of instructional activities and guide your assessment strategies.